negate, the United States should impose price controls on the pharmaceutical industry. Contention 1 is reducing access. Patterson of American University 18 writes that newly developed pharmaceuticals are regularly available to U.S. patients compared to those in other countries. However, this is not a coincidence, as Call, the Takashila Institute 16 notes that since pharma companies need to recover their R&D costs as early as possible to maximize returns on their investments, they intentionally delay the release of drugs into countries with price controls. This is empirically confirmed by Kyle of MIT 07, who explains that price controls reduce the probability of drug entry by 75%. For instance, while it only takes 4 months from drug launch to market availability in the US, it takes 19 months in Europe. This is already proven to be deadly, as Spiegel at the Hill 17 finds that drug delays in Europe cause 600,000 deaths every year. Overall, Lakdawala at the University of Southern California 15 writes that on balance, more American lives would be lost with price controls than without it. Contention 2 is protecting the forgotten. While the debate surrounding the pharmaceutical industry has centered on the United States, many are being left out of the discussion. According to the Center for Disease Control 18, neglected tropical diseases, or NTDs, are tropical contagious diseases that affect more than 1 billion people globally who primarily reside in the most impoverished countries in the world. Unfortunately, the Kaiser Foundation 18 writes that the Trump administration has reduced funding for NTDs by 25%. Thankfully, the pharmaceutical industry has taken an active role in developing cures for NTDs, as the IFPMA 18 finds that the industry currently has 119 research and development projects aimed at providing cures to some of the deadliest NTDs. As a result, Moeni at the World Health Organization 18 writes that pharmaceutical companies have pledged nearly 18 billion donations of NTD drugs, providing an essential arsenal to combat the spread of these diseases throughout the developing world. These private ventures have already had a drastic effect on millions, as the IMA World Health 18 stresses that since the constant flow of NTD drug donations has provided access to high-quality medicines free of charge, 230 million fewer individuals live with NTDs. However, this would all change in a world with price controls. The University of Pennsylvania 11 notes that for drug makers serving impoverished nations calls for striking a balance between meeting public health needs and maximizing profits. Thus, pharmaceutical companies must maintain robust profits in order to sustain these international philanthropic efforts. Problematically, so that the U.S. National Library of Medicine 08 observes that price controls would decrease pharmaceutical revenue by 20%. This is extremely troubling, because when faced with tight budgets, pharmaceutical companies prioritize products that generate the most profit without having to heavily invest in new and expensive research and development. Neglected tropical disease research would certainly be the first area of austerity taken by pharmaceutical companies, as Oriola of the Canadian Journal of Law and Technology 16 writes that pharmaceutical R&D is skewed in favor of drugs which have an established and lucrative market. Since most of the countries where NTDs predominate are impoverished and lack the necessary purchasing power, less than 5% of global R&D is devoted to diseases that predominantly affect developing countries. Cutting off the supply of these life-saving drugs would be devastating. The Kaiser Foundation 18 identifies that 185,000 people die every year due to neglected tropical diseases. Additionally, there's no group of diseases that is so intimately linked to poverty as they significantly limit the productivity of millions. The World Health Organization 16 reports that neglected tropical diseases result in billions of dollars in lost wages, all but ensuring those infected and their family members remain trapped in a cycle of poverty and disease. However, by maintaining the robust status quo that has already saved millions of lives, pharmaceutical donations can aid in revitalizing the developing world. Moeni of the University of London 18 finds that for every dollar invested in fighting NTDs, $42 in economic gains can be realized, resulting in $565 billion in productivity gains worldwide by 2030. Sustaining these efforts is crucial, as Page of Yale University finds that poverty kills 50,000 people daily, or 18 million a year, constituting the largest cause of death around the world. To continue to save lives of hundreds of millions of people, we strongly urge it to begin.
Is everybody good? Albie and I affirm resolve. The United States federal government should impose price controls on the pharmaceutical industry. Our sole contention is correcting the market. There's a crisis in the United States revolving around the affordability of pharmaceutical drugs. Henry Waxman of the Commonwealth Fund reports in 2017 that drug prices have increased 10% annually, exceeding inflation. Court of Market Watch corroborated in 2017, finding that the prices of most common medications have increased by 85%. Dana Sarnak of Johns Hopkins University further explains in 2017, finding that other high-income countries, the United States price, compared to other high-income countries, United States prices are 117% higher and health outcomes are significantly worse. Pharmaceutical companies are at fault. Fox of the Harvard Business Review in 2017 reports that drug companies utilize a number of tactics to thwart competition, including bribing generic companies to keep cheap alternatives off the market, filing citizen petitions to delay generics from being federally approved, and restricting smaller business access to drug samples for testing. Big Pharma has consolidated the market with a monopoly-esque tactics, effectively preventing affordable options from entering the market. Even generic drugs, supposedly more affordable, have been driven off the market by Big Pharma. Large branded companies spike their prices right before generic enters the market to ensure high price points for both drugs. David of the International Medicines quantifies in 2017, average drug price increase of 30% increased generic drug prices by 60%. Thus, Dean Baker of New York Times concludes in 2016 that prices are hundreds of times the normal free market price. When the market fails, the government steps in to correct it. Price controls corrects the free market price in two ways. First, directly setting the price. Price controls means that firms aren't allowed to set prices above a certain level, leading to lower prices for consumers. No matter how much the industry consolidated or exploits the market, the end result must be lower prices. This empirically happened in similar countries that imposes price controls. Marsak, the Croatian Medical Journal in 2002 reports, all EU countries have imposed price ceilings and saw lower prices by 25%. In the bigger market of the United States, Acosta of the Cochrane Library quantifies in 2014, reference pricing in the US will reduce costs by 39% in just 1 year. Second is stopping consolidation. Sorcher of the Public Citizen magazine reports in 2016, the past few years have seen the consolidation of the pharmaceutical industry as larger companies captured 64% of the global market, up from 28% in 2007. Companies consolidate the market to increase prices. Gagnon, the Globalization Health Journal, reports in 2017 that several companies dominate the non-competitive markets by cornering niche markets through killer acquisitions so they can substantially increase prices. Henkel of the Yale University Department of Economics quantifies in 2017, acquired drug prices are at first 28% higher, have a growth rate 2 times higher than non-acquired counterparts. Price controls reverses this because they remove the reasons why companies monopolize in the first place. If they cannot increase prices, they have no incentive to acquire. Brecky of the Journal of Public Economics quantifies the effect in 2010. Under a price control system, large monopolies see a 15% reduction in brand name market shares and an average drop in drug prices by 30%. Correcting the market has 2 impacts. First, increasing prescription access. Waxman argues that 1/3 of Americans go without taking their prescriptions because of high costs. Benjamin of Public Health quantifies in 2012, approximately 125,000 deaths per year in the United States are due to non-adherence to prescriptions. The second impact is reducing hospital costs. In light of high drug prices, Ruben Fire of Healthcare reports in 2016 that annual patient drug spending is up by 40%. Payer reimbursement cannot keep up, affecting nearly all hospitals' abilities to manage overall healthcare costs. Silverman of Stat News cooperates in 2016 hospitals are struggling to come up with substitutes to make care affordable for patients, making the inaccurate trade-off in substitution in name of finance the higher likelihood for medical error. Johns Hopkins University quantifies more than 250,000 people in the United States die every year from medical errors, a significant portion being from miscommunications and drug dose administration, making it the 3rd leading cause of death in the country. Because medicine should give people their life instead of a receipt, we affirm. Everyone's ready?
You talked about consolidation within the market. What's the difference between these mergers and then these killer acquisitions that your evidence later talks about in the
There's
article?
good mergers and acquisitions, then there's bad mergers and acquisitions. We talked about the killer acquisitions of small businesses that are used.
Wait, so these 68% that you cite, are those the killers or are those the actual like standard
killer
mergers?
acquisitions.
Wait, no, that's not true.
Okay,
Well,
sure.
logically, larger companies just don't stop innovation at the local level because
they
these
do.
smaller firms generate the vast majority of innovations.
I would rather trust Fox of the Harvard Business Review than your opinion because he tells
Right.
you that small companies are knocked off the market and
No, but
generic.
you shouldn't
Hold on,
trust that
hold on,
if the
hold on.
work
Can I
doesn't
finish
make
what I'm saying?
sense, right?
Can I finish what I'm saying? The reason why they do that is because they kill off the patents that create cheaper drugs, which is why
Yeah.
monopolies own the market.
Wait,
Can I
wait,
ask you a
no,
question?
that's not true.
We've been on this for like
Alright,
40
sure.
seconds. Okay. Your second contention is about like tropical diseases, right? And you tell me the
Neglected
IMA,
tropical
okay, the IMA card tells you they give away these drugs free of charge.
Yes,
Why?
because
They're good people?
yeah.
Pharmaceutical companies, like, they're just nice people, they like to give away free things?
There are a lot of reasons as to why they give it to the developing world.
Okay,
but
so
that
give me
doesn't
one
matter
of them.
so long
Wait,
as they're
wait,
doing
wait. The reason definitely does matter.
No.
Why do they do it?
No, there may be a couple of reasons, but as long as they're doing it in the negative world, that's still important.
The warranting for why they do it definitely matters because that's a link in your second contention. So tell me why they do it.
We say because when they have excess profit, they're able to do so. When you reduce revenues, you reduce the capability for them to continue to donate in the developing world.
Hold on. So if they don't make any money in the developing world, so that's why they charge low prices. But you tell me they give it away for free.
No, they give it for free because when they have excess profit, they're able to continue with philanthropic efforts. That's why they do.
Okay, so philanthropic efforts is about their public image, right?
Okay, it doesn't matter if
it's about like
image.
What they look like.
No, okay,
right?
I would say that doesn't matter.
You're saying like two different things here. If they care about their public image, they wouldn't be killing 125,000 Americans each year. If they are nice people, then they should always give away drugs for free, which is why drugs should be free in the United States too. That doesn't make sense.
What I'm saying is as long as they have excess profit, they're going to continue to do it in the developing world.
Okay.
Because these people don't have access to basic infrastructure and healthcare infrastructure.
You're like,
that's why they
it's
have
like super
to
muddled,
do it in the developing
you
world.
can have a question.
You can deal with this in rebuttal, not in crossfire.
Sure.
Let's talk about your impact.
We can do both.
You say that like hospitals kill 250,000 people die every year because of mistakes in
medical
hospitals.
error, yeah.
How does price controls decrease medical errors done by doctors?
So the warrant is about substitutions, right? Because, for example, if they can't afford Advil, they're like, oh, put a cold rag on your head, you'll be fine. Wait. That's the substitution we say is really bad. That's what causes medical error and death.
I would say that a trained medical professional who's gone through many years of residency.
Look, obviously I exaggerated the
the
example, right? It's probably more like a drug that cures cancer. Instead of that, they're like, we're gonna delay the cancer.
Wait. So who are these people that are most affected by these prices? Are they low-income individuals, middle income, or high income?
Okay, low-income individuals probably have exemptions. Middle-income individuals still can't afford the pharmaceutical drugs, which is why we say 1/3 of Americans cannot do so.
So
can I ask you a question?
Wait, really quickly.
We've been on this, we have 10 seconds.
But this is important. This is the thesis of your case.
Let's talk about it.
If drugs cost tens of thousands of dollars, how many more Americans will get access in your world?
1/3.
No, it's not 1/3.
That's
You
the
say
Waxman
right now
part.
1/3 can't afford it. You need to prove that the impact is going to occur on all of those Americans.
1/3
so
of
how many
Americans
more
don't
Americans
have
get
enough
access?
money to buy drugs. Lower the price of drugs, they have the money to buy
drugs. But you need to prove that it actually meets the threshold. Just because it costs $90,000, you reduce the price by 30%.
The resolution isn't about where it is. We can manipulate to wherever we need it to be.
Wait, no, that's not.
We're 20 seconds.
I'm here on some.
Committee on their case. Is everyone ready? Their entire argument rests on the link that when you decrease the prices of drugs, you simultaneously increase the access to drugs. That is not true. First of all, there's going to be more shortages when you affirm the resolution. So the Rockpoint Corporation in 2014 points out, when we placed a price control on vaccines and decreased the prices by 40% because demand for vaccines increased so much, pharmaceutical companies couldn't keep up with supply because they no longer could look at the prices to see what demand was, so they couldn't actually fill up supply. So at the end of the day, less people were getting access to vaccines, and that's what's going to happen when you place these price controls on pharmaceuticals. The second reason is hospitals. In the status quo, the Miranda Corporation points out that hospitals upcharge the price of pharmaceuticals by 500%. That means even when you affirm the resolution, if somebody goes into a hospital in need of life-saving care, that actual pharmaceutical will cost 500% more, which means at the end of the day, people only get access to Me Too drugs or lifestyle drugs rather than getting access to the life-saving care that they need. The third reason is in case with drug delays. We explain that because it costs so much money to develop a drug in the first place, companies want to release the drug in a place where they make the most amount of money in the least amount of time. That's why Call concludes that it takes 4 months for a drug to get launched in the US and 7 to 19 months for that drug to get launched in the EU. And that's why The Hill concludes that 600,000 people die every single year because of these drug delays. When you affirm, not only do you increase that number, but you have more Americans dying because of drug delays. But also, in case, they also concede that regulations are a good thing because they point out that loopholes currently exist that allow companies to take a monopoly over the market. They don't actually solve for this for two reasons. First, this policy creates complacency. We think we've solved this multifaceted issue by passing a tiny policy. At the end of the day, we become complacent on the issue and don't actually pass any more medical reform. But the second reason is that because this policy actually causes bad things like drug delays and drug shortages, and people still don't get access in hospitals, at the end of the day, it's going to be used as ammunition for the opposition, and the opposition will point to the this policy as a reason why we shouldn't pass any more medical reform in the future. This happens with other controversial topics like gun reform and the Brady Bill, which was used as an example of not passing any more gun reform in the future. So that means that they're already conceding we need more actual legislation on this issue. They're not going to solve for that. But second, the National Library of Medicine concludes that right now there's so many legal loopholes that exist that in the affirmative world there's still going to be things like pay for delays and the Hatch-Waxman Act that allow pharmaceutical companies to take a huge monopoly over the market, which doesn't change whether you affirm or negate the resolution. The affirmative world will never actually solve for monopolies. More importantly, on consolidation, they have the statistic that says 64% of the market is consolidated. In Crossfire, Andrew can't quantify whether that's consolidation or killer acquisitions, but I will. Business Insider tells you that 7% of total acquisitions are killer acquisitions, which means at the end of the day, they're not only even taking that much of the market up, but second, market consolidation also increases in the affirmative world because smaller businesses are making less money, which means that the big, ginormous corporations can buy out the small companies when they have less revenue because they become more vulnerable to buyouts. There's a unique increase in monopolization in the affirmative world. But also, they also tell us that pharmaceutical companies make money off of these consolidations, which means they're not going to cut that because that makes them more profit. They're probably going to cut something like R&D or cut something else that doesn't make them as much revenue, like donations to like the billion people who need NTDs. But then they tell you that access will increase and there are 125,000 people who are dying every year. First of all, they're not increasing access. People still are getting drug delays, shortages, people don't get access to drugs. But second, those 125,000 people are not just because of cost, because at the end of the day, that evidence from Brody tells you that there are 7 other reasons why the people are not getting access to drugs in the status quo. But finally, they tell you that hospitals are like substituting other things and not getting access to drugs in the status quo. First of all, hospitals still upcharge 500%, so when people need life-saving care, they're not able to go to hospitals and get it. But second, they never actually provide context for this argument, like how many people have actually died because of price controls in other countries in hospitals. They never actually provide context for people not having experience. People not having experience for administering medication is not a problem with price controls. It doesn't get solved whether you affirm or negate the resolution. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to be weighing access, you're going to be weighing it on the negative world because 1 billion people are infected with NTDs, but only 125,000 people die in the affirmative world.
We're going to take a little bit.
What's the hash? Can we see the hash?
Hatch-Waxman?
Yeah, hash.
Yep.
Okay,
Do
actually,
you wanna
I'll
see
see
it
that
or-
in cross.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is everybody ready? Okay. Their entire case is contingent on the fact that the pharmaceutical industry will have lower revenues for expenditure. But there's an overarching response to this that comes from the Los Angeles Times, who explains in 2015 that 73% of all funding for research and development that they talk about that's coming out of the pharmaceutical industry comes from the public sector. This is critical because Engelberg of Health Affairs magazine explains that if you put price controls on the industry and the government no longer has to spend on things like Medicare and Medicaid as much, you can divert $80 billion into grants for the pharmaceutical sector so they don't have to delay drugs and they don't have to forget the people who are affected with NTDs in the first place. But with that said, let's address their specific warrants. Their first contention talks about access and that they're going to delay entry into the United States market. This argument assumes that a company is going to outsource out of the United States. There is no way that happens because every single other high-income first world country has already instituted price controls. The reason why they left Europe was because the United States had no price controls. We implement price controls, they need to give you another country that all these companies are going to outsource to so they can
develop it there and make their return on investment. There is no world where this is going to happen. But secondly, I would say that the monopolization of the industry is what makes people delay in the first place. So if we win our second argument on consolidation, then they stop delaying in the first place because now you have a competitive market and they each have an intent to appeal to the consumers as soon as possible. Let's go on to their second contention, which is the bulk of their case. The fundamental flaw with this is they assume that big pharmaceutical corporations are the most charitable, philanthropic organizations in the entire world. That is not true under any means. Keep in mind, these are the companies that perpetuated things like the opioid crisis. They overprescribed opioids to get Americans addicted so they can make money off of them being addicted and dying in the first place. They are by no means a charitable organization in the first place. So, let's look into the reason why they're charging low prices for the developing world. It's because they make profit if the price is a lot lower. Think about it. A lot of people in the developing world, in the tropical areas they talk about, don't have a lot of money. They are impoverished people, which means if they hike the prices, they would sell none of them and make zero profit. That's why prices are low there, is because that's the only way they can make money. But secondly, and more importantly, Bosley of The Guardian explains that the monopolization of the industry from the United States trickles into the developing world, which kills competition in two ways. First, United States pharmaceutical companies influence free trade deals with other nations and make other countries sell all of their intellectual property rights to the pharmaceutical monopolies. This means that they prevent the developing world from setting up their own infrastructure to cure their own diseases and are contingent on the United States monopoly. But secondly, and more importantly, this means the monopoly bleeds abroad, which means they hike the prices. Specifically, 1.4 billion people across the world cannot afford basic medication because the patented drug is too high. This is a global issue that we link into if we break down these monopolies and set a price control on it specifically. But more importantly, 75% of HIV patients cannot afford the cure because the price is too expensive. If we win our case, we also win their second contention. With that said, let's go on to our case. They read a bunch of responses explaining why price controls would not reduce prices. The bulk of these, like shortages, drug delays, and the political complacency they talk about, are caused by big pharma. If we reduce consolidation, or at least cut their revenue to some extent, we fix this. Secondly, they say hospitals upcharge prices by 500%, probably because they can't afford prescription drugs to fund their hospital in the first place. They don't have an incentive to increase it by 500% because their goal and their Hippocratic oath is to help their patients to the best of their ability. But then let's talk about this political argument. They say that there's going to be complacency. If complacency was true, we would never pass every single policy because we would never get anything done as a result of that. We argue that price controls would be a foundational bill that you could put other things on top of. There's no reason why everyone is going to become complacent, especially if, like, the majority of Americans agree that drug prices are too high. Secondly, they think if it's a bad policy, then that'll fuel the opposition. So if we prove it's a good policy, they lose this argument. Then on killer acquisitions, they say 7% of everything is a killer acquisition, but we're not just talking about killer acquisitions. If 64% of the market is controlled by one company, they don't even have to acquire a small business. They can fluctuate the price to make sure they don't even start up in the first place, which is why there aren't small businesses right now. It's try or die if you vote for us.
You ready for question?
Yes.
I'm gonna ask the first question. You ready?
Okay, yeah.
In response to my argument about good policy making and, like, in the long term
Yes.
policy, right?
Mhm.
So what happened when we passed the Brady bill?
Is gun control more polarized?
Healthcare and gun control are very polarizing.
But the majority of Americans agree that drug prices are too high. It's not healthcare. It's lowering drug prices.
It's
It's
health
not
costs.
partisan. It's not partisan at all. Like, the
So how
majority
many
of
bills have
Americans,
been proposed to actually implement price controls?
several,
How many?
like that.
I mean, of like the tens of thousands that are proposed in every
The
single
reason
session.
why they're not passing is because the pharmaceutical industry has a lot of lobbying
And
power.
how do you
but
solve for that?
Because we fiat that the policy is passed. If you
Wait.
vote pro, you instantaneously pass price controls and lower the
Okay.
capacity for the industry to lobby.
Which just concedes
Can
my
I-
argument that lobbying and deep-rooted, like, actual systematic lobbying and legal loopholes still exist.
That
Do you have a
doesn't-
question?
Yeah, that doesn't respond to my argument. If they don't have money, how do they lobby?
What do you mean? Oh, so they're not making revenue.
Yes. If
Got
they,
it.
Yeah.
Do you have a question?
Like, we both agree that in price controls, they would have lower revenue, right?
Wait, you respond to my case by saying that that's not true.
No. There's a very different thing. The revenue that they have only can go to innovation because that's the only thing the public sector will fund.
Wait,
So they
you're
have to
right.
cut from
Your
things.
LA Times evidence is specific to investment into R&D.
Yes.
Right. Our
Creating
argument
new
is not
drugs.
about investment into R&D.
Yes,
Our
your argument is about creating new drugs and delaying them.
I think I understand my argument.
Well,
my
I hope
argument
so,
is
yeah.
that in the status quo it costs upwards of $2.6 billion to create a drug, which means they want to make the most
So
amount
great.
of money
Creating
in
a
the
drug.
shortest amount of time.
Creating
which
a
means
drug.
they release drugs in areas where they're going to
Creating
make
a
the least
drug.
amount
That
of
is
the most
research and
money, the most
development.
amount.
I think we both understand your argument here. But can I ask you a question?
Wait, I wanna go back on that. That's not
But
just research and
it's not trying
development,
to ask a
right?
question, though.
Because it costs the same amount of money to research and develop a drug,
Can I
right?
please ask what you have to
Okay,
create new drug?
fine.
That's the same thing. Anyway, where are the companies going to outsource?
Israel, Brazil, other countries where they don't have price controls.
So there's infrastructure
Right.
in
I
Israel
know
and
you're already
Brazil,
gonna say
and
that
they're
we
going
have
to
a
build
huge,
it all
wait,
up and
I know
start.
you're gonna say that we have a huge market share in the United States, but the reason we have a huge market share in the United States is because we don't have price
So you're
controls.
saying you have a piece of evidence that's saying the United States pharmaceutical industry is going to pick up and move to Israel and Brazil.
We have a piece of evidence that tells you that people are moving out of countries that don't have price
They
controls.
moved out of Europe and they moved to the United States.
Because the United States doesn't have price controls.
Exactly,
Just
and
supports
they
my
have
argument.
lots of infrastructure. That's the thing.
And you also tell me that we have deep-rooted lobbying issues which don't end up getting solved when you affirm.
But
I
that
have a
had
question.
nothing to do with,
I have a
with
question.
what we were just talking about.
I have
but
a
okay,
question.
sure.
Okay, in response to my case,
Okay.
all you say is that like they're not philanthropic efforts.
Absolutely
Who
not.
cares what pharmaceutical companies are trying to do if 230 million people have already been saved?
They're trying to make money. They make money off of the.
They're not selling-
They make money
wait.
off of 32 million people who
Albie,
are saved.
I don't think
they
you
don't make
respond to
money
my
off of the
argument.
1.4 billion
Albie,
people who cannot access
You don't
it.
understand my argument.
I
They're not
do
selling
understand
to
your
the
argument. Yeah,
people
they're
in these
donating
areas.
it.
They're
You're saying
donating
they're
them.
donating it because they're good people. They
They're
got
donating them.
Americans addicted to opioids
They
so that
donated
they could make money
$18 billion
off. Okay.
worth of drugs
So do they
to
care
these
more about
areas.
donating in their public image or making money?
They're donating, 230 million people were saved.
So
It doesn't matter what
if
their
it's their
intent
public
is if
image,
230 million people
of
have been
course
saved.
it matters what their
That's the
intent
end of
is because that's what a warrant is.
We're gonna run some fun. Starting.
That was 22 seconds.
Alright. So this could be our case and their case. Alright. Bye. Enjoy the round. Pleasure to come.
Yeah, pleasure to have you.
Alright. Our case, their case. At the top, Albie says that most of R&D comes from the federal government. That's not responsive to any of our cases. We don't talk about R&D. In our second contention specifically, we talk about drug donation. In our first contention, we talk about how since there's a profit incentive to recoup their investment, therefore they have to release in countries without price control. But on our first contention, they say that we can't name any examples. We give Russia, Israel, and Brazil. Those are all three countries that don't have price control where countries can move there. On our second contention, they have a couple responses. First, say that the pharmaceutical companies are really, really bad because they perpetuate the opioid crisis. One, that's not responsive to our argument. We're talking about developing countries. And second of all, they don't actually have I would argue that things like the opioid crisis occur because of the doctors on the local level. But then they say that right now, they sell to developing countries. That's not our argument. They're not selling to developing countries. They're donating it to them because they have excess profit. They neglect our entire warrant here. We explain that when there's excess profit, they're able to do philanthropic efforts such as donate the drugs to the developing world. That's why we explain that they've already been able to save 230 million lives over the past couple of years through these donations. We explain that 1 billion people have these diseases and 185,000 die every single year. We have risk of offense in our world. Then they have this one lofty term that says that the big companies are really, really bad because they push trade policies. One, I would argue that there's other factors into trade policy versus the other industries that want IP protection rights. But second of all, we say that this is not responsive to our actual argument because they're talking about selling it to countries. We're talking about donating it to countries. At that point, we still have access to our impact about saving lives, hundreds of millions of lives across the developing world. On to their case. They neglect a couple things in Dory's rebuttal. The first thing that they forget is that drug shortages. We explained when you decrease the price, it decreases the producers on the market. That's why there's drug shortages. That means there's decreased access. Second, on hospitals, they say they can't afford drugs, but they're profit-driven institutions. At that point, that's why they price these prices by 500%. That's why we gain access to the turn at the bottom of their first contention. But they explain that and right now they're able to use this as opposition for future reform in the healthcare sector. They explained in the first crossfire that there's so many other things that have to be fixed in the healthcare system. You need a comprehensive package, not just one-size-fits-all policy, but specifically on mergers and acquisition. We explain that right now, you actually turn the argument against them. When there's decreased revenue, that means that smaller firms have to bow down to these larger firms. And second of all, we say that they would never cut it because that's the profit center of their entire business.
Okay, we're going to take route starting now.
I'm gonna start on the top of my case, like shortages. Okay, is everybody good? Starting shortages, they're saying that pharmaceutical companies aren't going to produce any more supply, which is why there's going to be a shortage. That's not true. Ventola explains that only 4% of shortages are caused by lack of supply. Rather, 84% of all shortages are caused by monopoly manufacturing problems, which is why our second connection is going to be a link into the shortage argument that they talk about. But then, secondly, they say hospitals are profit-driven. That's not true. Hospitals care about the well-being of the people. That's why they signed the Hippocratic Oath to begin with. The easiest way for you to vote in the round is on the R first word, which has no ink at all. We tell you, Acosta explains, when you implement reference pricing, you decrease the cost by 39% in 1 year. We tell you this gives us our first impact, where Waxman explains 1/3 of Americans have no access to prescription drugs. That's 100% probable. You vote app today, you save the 125,000 people that are dying right now. Save those lives and vote for the app. But then let's win consolidation anyways. This responds to all of their rebuttal and their case. They just say businesses are only 7% killer acquisition. We say that doesn't matter because as Sorcher explains, 64% of the market is controlled by one monopoly, up from 28% in 2007. Prefer the historical precedents, these small businesses can't even enter the market in the first place, which is why we tell you we would solve this problem in 2 ways. First, we tell you we stop the incentive to consolidate in the first place, because the reason they consolidate is to hike the prices. If they can't hike the prices because of the price ceiling, then they have no incentive to consolidate. But secondly, even if we don't believe that, we tell you we decrease their capacity to consolidate. On their case, they tell you that you decrease their revenue by 20%. If they don't have money, they can't pay for mergers and acquisitions, which is why the Brecky card tells you that price controls reduce brand name market share by 13 or 15% and cause prices to drop by 30%. This links us into their second contention, where we tell you monopolization trickles into other countries and they sell all their intellectual property rights to the United States, which is why 1.4 billion people cannot afford their medication. But then, a little bit of defense on their first and second contention. They just say on their first contention that these people are going to move to Brazil. That's not true. The United States is the biggest market in the world. None of the companies are going to move to Brazil. That doesn't make sense. But secondly, they say the goodwill of the companies are going to cause donations to other third world countries. Again, that's not true. Monopolies are inherently pretty bad people. People like Martin Shkreli that hike the prices of Darapin by 5,000% clearly aren't good people. They don't solve the problem. We're the only risk of offense. It's try or die. Save the American people. Vote out.
You guys ready for cross?
Yeah.
So in response to our second contention, you say that they're setting up these IP rights and 1.4 billion people don't get access to medication because of that.
Across the world, yes.
Okay, how did they identify that the reason that they didn't get access is because of IP rights?
Because in the trade deal, the pharmaceutical companies lobby to say that you have to sell all of our intellectual property rights.
So does lobbying go away now?
Yes,
No.
Why?
because they don't have money to lobby.
No, wait.
So
If that
pharmaceutical companies
decreases
have no money
significantly-
in your
Well, of
Well,
course they're
no,
not
no,
going to go
hold on,
bankrupt,
hold on.
but we reduce their
Wait, wait.
capacity to do so.
You read
How
the
much
card.
more money do
Wait,
they
Dory.
spend on lobbying and
You read the
marketing
card.
versus R&D?
Dory, you read the card that says we decrease pharmaceutical revenue by 20%. We're just agreeing.
Right.
We're saying even if they have a further intent to monopolize,
Andrew, I
they
have a
cannot
question.
because of their capacity.
I understand your argument. Does marketing and lobbying make the money?
Does lobbying make them money? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, I
exactly.
agree.
But
So-
like,
so why would
if
they
you have a
decrease-
price control of the industry, they have less
Yeah.
money to invest in.
If they don't have the money to lobby,
No,
they can't lobby.
Why do you think they spend
Like,
19
what are you-
times
what are you gonna
more?
pay the
Andrew,
senators
I'm gonna
with?
ask you a question.
Drugs?
Why do you think they spend 19 times
understand.
more on marketing and lobbying than they do on actual R&D?
Wait, can you say that again?
Why do you think pharmaceutical companies spend 19 times more on marketing and lobbying
Because it's
than they do
profitable.
on R&D? Exactly.
Yeah, I
No,
agree.
we're saying
We're
if
saying
you
the same
take
thing.
their money
We're
away,
saying-
then they
but
have
what
a
we're
reduced
saying is that
capacity
under
to do
a
so.
budget cycle, like when the budget is going down,
Okay,
they have to
question,
prioritize
question.
like specific spending.
What do you do about monopolies?
What?
That's not our burden to solve.
Exactly, you do nothing.
No,
Right.
that's
That's not our burden to solve. We're
Alright.
advocating for the
See,
status
so-
quo.
yeah.
You're advocating for a
Yeah,
change.
I know, and I'm saying the
Exactly.
status quo is trash right now
No,
because
no.
the Sorcher card
But you
says
need to prove that-
64% of the
Right.
market is controlled by one
Right.
company.
Right,
That's terrible.
right. And this tiny policy is trying to put a one-size-fits-all solution on a
Right.
multifaceted issue,
It's the
which means at the
beginning.
end of the day, it doesn't actually
mean,
solve
look,
it.
Like, you don't really tell me like why that means everyone's just gonna not care about drugs in the future,
That's
right?
not our
People all
argument.
agree that drugs are pretty
No,
high
that's
and
not
monopolies
the
are pretty bad. Even if price controls don't solve the full problem, nobody's just gonna be like, oh, Pfizer control,
That's
everything
not
is
the
okay.
argument.
Like,
Andrew, let me clarify the argument. The argument is that when there are bad outcomes from the policy, therefore opposition to
Exactly.
healthcare
Which
reform
means
is
you have to
used
win
as
that there's a
ammunition.
bad outcome.
Yeah,
Which
okay.
means you have to win the
Oh,
The
debate
billion
outcome.
people who are getting
But, okay.
infected by
But
NTDs are
even,
kind of
okay,
important.
even if we grant you get the bad outcome, the way they can create backlash is through lobbying, which again requires money.
No,
The
but-
money comes from the decreased
Andrew,
revenue,
you're
which is why we
neglecting
link in.
what we're, look, Andrew, you're neglecting what we're saying throughout the entire
Sure,
round.
okay.
When they're forced to prioritize certain programs within the industry, they cut the thing that doesn't make them profit in the first place. They
Okay.
protect things that garner them future protections and future profits. That's
Even-
why lobbying
even
or
if-
monopolization wouldn't
Even
decrease
if the
their role.
intent
You're
goes
looking at
up, the
decreases by
capacity
the
goes
donation.
down.
Yeah, like I talked about this in my summary, right? They could want to lobby more. If they don't have money, they
Right.
can't. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter if they want
Right,
to.
so
I could want a
the first
Maserati.
thing-
I can't
The
get
first
it.
thing that they're gonna cut is the thing that makes them no profit, right?
What?
The thing that they're gonna cut first is the thing that makes them no profit, correct?
Okay, yeah,
Got it.
But-
Alright, that's the end of the
that's
process.
fine.
We're gonna run some prep.
Okay.
It's gonna be, my case and then their case. Is everyone ready? They just conceded something really important. They told us A, pharmaceutical companies have an incentive to make a profit. B, marketing makes them a lot of profit. And C, that they're gonna cut the thing that makes them no profit first. Donating to developing nations makes those companies no profit, but it cures 230 million people and prevents the 185,000 from dying every single year and the billion who are infected by NTDs from dying as well. That means that at the end of the day, that's going to get cut first. It's conceded by Lake Mary. Don't let them get away with that. But that's really important because we provide you the actually probability and the context of our argument. We show you that in the past, 18 billion, that right now, $18 billion of WHO donations have, or of like company donations have been given to these countries, and 230 million people have been saved. 1 billion people still need to get saved. All they say in response to this is that they sell IP rights to the United States, and that's 1.4 billion people who don't actually get access. First of all, this isn't really responsive to our argument because our argument is about trade deals. Our argument is that they're not donating in the first place. But second, that doesn't actually get solved in either world because at the end of the day, they're still lobbying in both worlds. We both agree. However, in the affirmative world, you actually increase the amount of lobbying that happens because it creates ammunition for the opposition. That's where you move on to their case because they never actually respond to this properly. We tell you that when you pass a policy so controversial on the issues of healthcare like this, that means that the opposition to these actual policies are not going to allow anything to get passed in the future, which means this is the only thing that we pass, and it's not an actual solution. The National Library of Medicine concludes that there are plenty of loopholes that still exist that are legal for pharmaceutical companies to still take a monopoly over the market. That's why they lose monopolies, because right now, not only are only 7% of these acquisitions killer, but small businesses are still going to continue to get bought out because they're making less money, they're more vulnerable to buyouts from big companies. But in addition, they try to tell you that 64% of the market is monopolized. The reason that they're buying other companies is to make things more efficient and decrease delays. That's really important because if you're going to be voting on delays, you're going to be voting for the negative world because 600,000 people die because of delays in like the EU right now. But at the end of the day, they're not going to be dying in the United States if you negate. But also, they also tell you that there's like going to be incentive for them to do that. It's a profit incentive. They'll continue to buy out small companies to make more money. That doesn't end when you affirm.
We're gonna take that.
Is everybody ready? Starting on my first link. Okay. The one thing they extend on our case's final focus is that legal loopholes will still exist. We're closing them with price controls. But more importantly, go to our first link, which has no response or rebuttal in today's round. This is the most important argument because of the Acosta evidence. The moment you affirm you reduce prices by 39% in the first year, that is 100% probable. Here's how you weigh this. You weigh this against the idea that pharmaceutical companies are going to get up and move to Israel. You weigh this against the idea that pharmaceutical companies care so much about people's well-being that they're just going to give everything for free. I would argue if you want to make sure that they donate for these countries for free forever, you put a price control on them and say you can only donate to the tropical regions for free. That is our argument. If you want their second contention, you have to vote for us and put a price control on that. But secondly, if that's not enough for you, we still win our consolidation warrant. They just say that 7% are killer acquisitions and that small businesses will be hurt, without ever refuting the uniqueness evidence that we give you from Sorcerer. 64% of the market is controlled by one company. This means they're not even acquiring, they don't have to be acquiring emerging. If they control the market, they can just hike prices, which prevents small businesses from entering in the first place. It's try or die for us, but we even give you two very clear warrants. First, the incentive goes down. They agree with us. The reason why they monopolize is to make money, which means if you set the amount of money that they can make, they no longer have an incentive to have a monopoly. But more importantly is the capacity. We both agree that you take away their revenue. They're saying that they're just going to cut from things like marketing. There's only so much you can reallocate. Their revenue goes down by 20%. You reduce their capacity to do things like mergers and acquisitions. You reduce their capacity to move to Israel. You reduce their capacity to lobby in the first place, which is why the Brecky evidence wins us the round. Price controls reduce brand name monopoly market share by 15%. This not only links into our impact on 1/3 of Americans dying, which is already 100% probability if you vote for us, but also their second contention, because these monopolies are the ones that create abusive trade deals to sell their intellectual property rights. These are the ones that make 1.4 billion people around the world not able to afford basic medication. You break monopolies, you increase access, not just in the United States, but across the world. We urge you to affirm.